The chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the Grand Ellison Hall cast a golden glow across the faces of 400 guests, each dressed in their finest attire, each clutching champagne flutes that caught the light like tiny stars. The marble floors gleamed so brightly you could see your reflection in them, and the scent of white roses filled the air with an almost suffocating sweetness. This was the kind of wedding that people talked about for years afterward, the kind that appeared in glossy magazines and made strangers on social media sigh with envy. But on this particular evening, in this particular moment, something was about to happen that would make this wedding unforgettable for entirely different reasons. Near the entrance, just beyond the ornate double doors that separated the reception area from the ceremony hall, an elderly woman stood trembling. Her hands shook as she smoothed down the simple gray dress she wore, a dress that looked painfully out of place among the designer gowns and tailored suits surrounding her. Her name was Margaret Lewis, and she was 72 years old. The lines etched into her face told stories of sleepless nights and hard labor, of sacrifices made in silence and prayers whispered in the dark. Her eyes, though tired, still held a spark of something that refused to die, even now, even here, even after everything. The guests whispered among themselves, stealing glances at her, wondering who she was and why she looked so afraid. Some assumed she was a member of the catering staff who had wandered into the wrong area. Others thought perhaps she was a distant relative, someone from the groom's past that he had reluctantly invited out of obligation. None of them could have imagined the truth. None of them could have guessed what was about to unfold before their eyes, what their phones would capture, what the world would see within hours. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Inside the hall, Evan Lewis stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture perfect. He was 38 years old, tall and handsome in his custom-made tuxedo, his dark hair styled with precision, his smile practiced and confident. He looked like a man who had conquered the world, like someone who had always belonged in rooms like this, surrounded by people like these. The guests who knew him would have sworn he was born into privilege, that he had grown up attending galas and summer homes in the Hamptons, that his life had always been smooth and easy and filled with opportunity. They would have been wrong. 30 years earlier, in a neighborhood called East Ridge on the other side of the city, a different version of this story was unfolding. The streets there were cracked and uneven, the buildings covered in graffiti, the air thick with the smell of garbage that sat too long in the summer heat. Sirens wailed at all hours, and people learned to sleep through the sound of shouting, of bottles breaking, of gunshots that cracked through the night like thunder. In a third-floor apartment with water-stained walls and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly, Margaret Lewis worked 2 jobs to keep her son fed and safe. During the day, she stood behind the counter at Danny's Diner on 5th Street, flipping eggs and pouring coffee for truck drivers and construction workers who left small tips and smaller smiles. Her feet ached by noon, her back screamed by 3, but she never sat down, never complained, never let anyone see how tired she was. When her shift ended at 4, she went home long enough to make sure Evan had dinner waiting for him. Then she caught the bus to Mercy General Hospital, where she cleaned floors until midnight. Evan was 8 years old then, small for his age, with dark eyes that saw too much too soon. He waited for his mother in that apartment every evening, doing his homework at the kitchen table under a flickering light, eating the meals she had prepared before rushing off to her second job. Sometimes he fell asleep before she came home, and she would find him curled up on the couch, his math book still open beside him. She would carry him to bed, tuck him in, and kiss his forehead before collapsing into her own bed, too exhausted to even change out of her work clothes. Margaret's husband, Daniel, had left when Evan was 4. He walked out one Tuesday morning saying he was going to buy cigarettes and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, no forwarding address. Just gone. Margaret tried to find him at first, calling his friends, checking the bars he used to frequent, but eventually she stopped looking. Some people leave because they want something better. Some people leave because they can't handle what they have. Daniel was the second kind. After he left, Margaret started drinking. It began with a glass of wine after Evan went to bed, just something to help her sleep, to quiet the thoughts that raced through her mind at night. But one glass became two, then three, then half a bottle, then a whole bottle. She told herself she had it under control, that she was fine, that she could stop whenever she wanted. She told herself a lot of lies in those days. The truth came crashing down one night when Evan was 12. Margaret had finished her hospital shift and stopped at a liquor store on the way home. She bought a bottle of vodka, telling herself it would last the whole week, knowing it wouldn't. When she got home, Evan was already asleep. She sat at the kitchen table and poured herself a drink, then another, then another. She didn't remember finishing the bottle. She didn't remember passing out with her head on the table. She didn't remember anything until she woke up the next morning to find Evan standing over her, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, please stop." That was the moment everything changed. Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the fear in his eyes, the exhaustion, the pain. She saw what she was doing to him, what she was becoming, what she would lose if she didn't change. She called in sick to both her jobs that day. She found a rehab program that offered sliding scale fees for people who couldn't afford treatment. She checked herself in that same week. The 90 days she spent in that facility were the hardest of her life. She went through withdrawal, through therapy sessions that made her confront things she had buried for years, through group meetings where she heard stories that mirrored her own. She cried more in those 3 months than she had in the previous 3 years. But she stayed. She fought. She clawed her way back from the edge because she had a son who needed her, a son who deserved better than a mother who drowned her problems in bottles and excuses. When she came home, Evan hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he whispered. From that day forward, Margaret's entire life revolved around one purpose: giving Evan a future. She stayed sober. She worked her 2 jobs without complaint. She saved every penny she could, hiding cash in envelopes tucked between books on the shelf, in a coffee can under the sink, anywhere she could stash away a little bit more. When Evan brought home straight A's, she cried with joy. When he won a science fair in 8th grade, she took a photo and carried it in her wallet. When he told her he wanted to go to college, she told him he could do anything he set his mind to. "You're going to have a better life than this," she told him one evening as they sat together in their small living room. "You're going to get out of here. You're going to be somebody." Evan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What about you, Mom?" "Don't worry about me," she said, smiling. "I'll be fine as long as you're okay." She meant it. Every word. At that time, she believed that her happiness was tied to his success, that watching him rise would be enough, that she didn't need anything more than knowing he had escaped the trap that East Ridge represented. She believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good mother meant erasing yourself so your child could shine brighter. She believed a lot of things that would come back to haunt her later. Evan studied harder than any kid in his school. He spent his evenings in the public library, his weekends volunteering at community centers, his summers taking extra classes. He applied to 12 universities, each one farther from East Ridge than the last. When the acceptance letters started arriving, Margaret cried reading every single one. When the scholarship offer came from Northlake University, one of the most prestigious schools in the state, she screamed so loudly their neighbors came knocking to make sure everything was okay. The day Evan left for college, Margaret helped him pack his things into 2 old suitcases she had bought at a thrift store. She made him his favorite meal, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and they ate together in silence, both trying not to cry. When it was time to go, she drove him to the bus station in her rusted Honda, the one that barely started on cold mornings, the one she had kept running through sheer force of will and prayers. "You call me when you get there," she said, hugging him at the terminal. "And you call me every week. I want to hear everything." "I will, Mom. I promise." She watched the bus pull away, watched it disappear around the corner, and then she sat in her car and cried for an hour. She cried because she was proud. She cried because she was scared. She cried because she knew, somehow, that things would never be quite the same again. Northlake University sat on 300 acres of pristine land 30 miles outside the city, a world unto itself with ivy-covered buildings and manicured lawns that looked like they belonged on postcards. Students walked between classes carrying leather bags and wearing clothes that cost more than Margaret made in a month. They talked about ski trips and summer internships in New York, about their parents' connections and their families' vacation homes. They spoke a language Evan didn't know, move through a world he had only seen on television. For the first few weeks, Evan called his mother every Sunday like he promised. He told her about his classes, about his roommate who came from Connecticut, about the dining hall that served 5 different kinds of salad. Margaret listened to every word, asking questions, laughing at his stories, telling him how proud she was. But she could hear something in his voice, something that made her chest tighten with worry. He sounded different, distant, like he was speaking to her from across a great chasm that kept growing wider. By October, the calls became less frequent. Every other week, then once a month. When they did talk, the conversations grew shorter. Evan said he was busy with midterms, with group projects, with activities. Margaret believed him because she wanted to, because believing him was easier than acknowledging what was really happening. What was really happening was that Evan was reinventing himself. He started introducing himself as someone who grew up in a modest middle-class neighborhood, which technically wasn't a lie but certainly wasn't the truth. When people asked about his parents, he gave vague answers, steering the conversation away before anyone could dig deeper. He changed the way he dressed, trading his thrift store jeans for clothes he bought on sale at stores he couldn't really afford. He listened carefully to how other students spoke, their inflections and their vocabulary, and he practiced in front of the mirror until he could mimic them perfectly. One evening during his sophomore year, a group of students invited him to a party at someone's off-campus apartment. The place was beautiful, all hardwood floors and modern furniture, nothing like the cramped spaces Evan had known growing up. Someone asked him where he was from. Just outside the city, Evan said, deliberately vague. Cool. What do your parents do? Evan hesitated for just a second before the lie slipped out smoothly. They passed away when I was younger. Car accident. The sympathy was immediate and overwhelming. People told him how sorry they were, how strong he must be, how brave. And Evan felt something twist inside him, something dark and shameful, but also something that felt like relief. Because now he didn't have to explain. Now he didn't have to worry about anyone asking questions. Now he could be whoever he wanted to be, unencumbered by the past he was trying so desperately to escape. He didn't call his mother that week, or the next. When she finally reached him, her voice cracked with worry. Evan, honey, I've been trying to call you for days. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. Too busy to call your mother? I said I'm fine. I'll call you later. He hung up before she could say anything else. Margaret sat in her apartment staring at the phone, a cold fear settling into her bones. She told herself he was just going through a phase, that college was overwhelming, that he needed space. She told herself everything would be fine. But deep down, in the part of herself she tried to ignore, she knew something was breaking between them, something that might never be fixed. Evan graduated with honors 4 years later. Margaret took 2 buses and a train to attend the ceremony, wearing the nicest dress she owned, her hands clutching a bouquet of flowers she had bought from a street vendor. She sat in the back of the auditorium, her eyes scanning the crowd of families, all of them looking so comfortable, so confident, so different from her. When Evan's name was called, and he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, Margaret stood and clapped until her hands hurt, tears streaming down her face. After the ceremony, she found him outside surrounded by his friends, all of them laughing and taking photos. She approached slowly, hesitantly, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. Evan, she called. He turned, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or embarrassment. He recovered quickly, pasting on a smile. Mom, you made it. Of course I made it. I wouldn't miss this for anything. She tried to hug him, but he pulled back slightly, aware of the eyes watching them. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice polite but distant. I've got to go meet some people, but I'll call you later, okay? She watched him walk away with his friends, watched them disappear into the crowd, and she stood there holding her flowers, feeling like an intruder at her own son's graduation. She took the long journey home alone, and he never called. The years that followed were a masterclass in erasure. Evan moved to Clearwater Bay, a coastal city known for its tech industry and expensive real estate. He landed a job at a consulting firm that paid more money than Margaret had made in a decade. He moved into a luxury condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. He joined a gym, hired a personal trainer, bought a wardrobe full of designer suits. He became the person he had always pretended to be, and with each passing day, The kid from East Ridge faded further into the background. When colleagues asked about his family, Evan kept his story consistent. His parents died young, he was raised by relatives, he preferred not to talk about it. People respected his privacy, admired his resilience, never questioned the narrative he had constructed. He went to networking events and charity galas, shook hands with executives and politicians, made connections that opened doors to even more opportunities. He was successful, admired, envied. He was everything he had ever wanted to be. Margaret, meanwhile, continued working. She had left the diner and the hospital, her body no longer able to handle the physical demands of those jobs. Now she worked in the laundry room of a mid-tier hotel, folding sheets and towels in a basement room that smelled of bleach and fabric softener. It was quieter work, easier on her back, but it paid less. She moved to a smaller apartment, a studio with one window that looked out onto a brick wall. She kept a scrapbook of Evan's life, clipping articles from newspapers and printing stories from company websites. There was a photo of him accepting an award, another of him speaking at a conference, a mention of him in a business magazine's 30 under 30 list. She collected these fragments like precious treasures, proof that her sacrifices had meant something, that her son had become somebody. She sent him cards on his birthday, on holidays, little notes telling him she loved him and was proud of him. Most of them went unanswered. Once, she called his office. The receptionist put her through, and when Evan answered, his voice was professional and cold. "This isn't a good time, Margaret." "Margaret. Not Mom. Not Mother. Margaret. I'm sorry, honey. I just wanted to hear your voice. I miss you. I'm in the middle of something. I'll call you back." He didn't. When Evan was 35, he met Lauren Whitfield at a marketing conference in San Diego. She was beautiful and intelligent, with honey blonde hair and a smile that made people trust her immediately. She worked for a major advertising firm, handled accounts worth millions, spoke 3 languages fluently. They talked over coffee, then dinner, then breakfast. Within 6 months, they were dating. Within a year, he proposed. Lauren was everything Evan wanted in a partner, accomplished, well-connected, from the right kind of family. Her parents lived in a restored Victorian in Riverside Heights, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the state. They had old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, the kind that opened doors without needing to knock. When Evan met them, they welcomed him warmly, impressed by his success, charmed by his confidence. They never asked too many questions about his background, and he offered just enough information to satisfy their curiosity without revealing anything real. Lauren did ask, though. One evening as they lay in bed in his condo, she traced patterns on his chest and said, "Tell me about your family." "There's not much to tell," Evan said, staring at the ceiling. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by an aunt. We're not close. That must have been hard. I managed. Do you ever think about finding her? Your aunt?" "No." The finality in his voice discouraged further questions, but Lauren sensed there was more to the story. She had learned to read people in her line of work, to notice the things they didn't say, the micro-expressions that betrayed their carefully maintained facades. There was something about Evan's past that he was hiding, something that caused him pain. She wanted to help, to understand, to support him. But every time she got close, he pulled away. On a cold November morning, Margaret collapsed while loading towels into an industrial dryer. Her coworker found her on the floor, gasping for breath, her face pale and sweaty. The ambulance arrived within minutes. At the hospital, doctors ran tests, scanned her heart, measured the damage. The diagnosis came back grim. Severe coronary artery disease, multiple blockages, heart function at 30%. She needed surgery, triple bypass, maybe quadruple, depending on what they found when they opened her up. The surgeon was direct. Without surgery, you have maybe 6 months, probably less. With surgery, you could have years. "How much?" Margaret asked, her voice barely a whisper. The surgeon glanced at the insurance coordinator standing nearby. The woman pulled out paperwork, did some quick calculations. "Your insurance will cover about 40%, she said. "After that, you're looking at around $75,000 out of pocket." Margaret felt the room spin. $75,000. She barely had $75 in her checking account. Her savings, the little bit she had managed to set aside over the years, had been depleted by an emergency root canal and a car repair she couldn't avoid. She had nothing. She was nothing. Just an old woman with a broken heart, and a son who never called. She spent 3 days in the hospital while they stabilized her, pumping her full of medications that cost more than her monthly rent. When they discharged her, they gave her a stack of papers, phone numbers for financial assistance programs, suggestions for payment plans. She took it all home and spread it out on her kitchen table, trying to make sense of numbers that might as well have been written in a foreign language. For 2 weeks, Margaret tried everything. She applied for medical loans and was denied because her credit score was too low, a result of years of barely scraping by and occasionally paying bills late. She reached out to charities that help patients with medical expenses and was told there were waiting lists months long. She looked into clinical trials, hoping maybe she could participate in research that would cover her costs, but she didn't qualify for any of the studies currently enrolling. Every door she knocked on closed in her face. Every hope she grasped it slipped through her fingers. She sat in her apartment one evening, the pain in her chest coming in waves now, sharp and demanding, impossible to ignore. Her medication helped some, but the doctor had made it clear, without surgery, these pills were just buying her time, and not much of it. She picked up her phone and stared at the contact labeled Evan. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. She had promised herself she would never ask him for help, never be a burden, never make him feel obligated. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. She could hear noise in the background, voices and laughter, the clink of glasses. He was at dinner somewhere nice, somewhere expensive. Hello. Evan, it's me. It's your mother. A pause. Is everything okay? No, honey. No, it's not. She took a shaky breath. I'm sick. My heart. The doctors say I need surgery or I'm going to die. I've tried everything. I've looked everywhere, but I can't afford it. I don't know what else to do. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him moving, probably walking away from the table, finding somewhere private to take this call. How much? 75,000. She heard him exhale, a sound that could have been frustration or resignation or something else entirely. I need to think about it, he said finally. This is a lot to process. Evan, please. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. I'm scared. I said I need to think about it. I'll call you back. He hung up before she could say she loved him, before she could say thank you, before she could say anything at all. Margaret sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear, and wondered if this was what it felt like to reach the end of everything. 3 days passed. Margaret called twice and got his voicemail both times. She left messages that she tried to keep calm and measured, not wanting to sound desperate even though desperate was exactly what she was. On the 4th day, her phone rang. Evan's name appeared on the screen, and her heart lurched in her chest, the damaged muscle protesting the sudden surge of hope and fear. Evan, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. We need to meet, he said. Are you well enough to travel? Yes. Yes, of course. Where? There's a coffee shop in Riverside Heights. Café Moreau. Do you know it? She didn't, but she said, I'll find it. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Evan, thank you. Thank you so much. Tomorrow, he repeated and ended the call. Margaret took 3 buses to get to Riverside Heights the next day, leaving her apartment 2 hours early to make sure she arrived on time. The neighborhood was unlike anything she had seen in years, with tree-lined streets and pristine sidewalks, historic homes with perfectly manicured lawns, boutique shops and galleries that looked too expensive to even walk into. She found Café Moreau tucked between an art gallery and a wine store, its exterior charming and quaint, its interior full of people typing on laptops and sipping drinks that cost more than her hourly wage. Evan was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing a suit that probably cost thousands of dollars. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face before he smoothed it away. Was it shame? Regret? Or just annoyance at being seen with her in public? Margaret walked over slowly, aware of how out of place she looked in her old coat and worn shoes. She sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Hi, honey, she said softly. Margaret. There it was again. Not mom. Not mother. Just her name, spoken like she was a business associate, like they were strangers negotiating a contract. Thank you for meeting me. I know how busy you are. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I've thought about your situation. And I can help you. I can pay for the surgery. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she felt dizzy. Oh, Evan. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I'll pay you back somehow. There's a condition. The relief evaporated instantly, replaced by cold dread. A condition? Evan leaned forward, his voice low. I'm getting married in 3 months. Lauren and I are having a big wedding. For 100 guests. Her family, my colleagues, everyone important in my life will be there. That's wonderful, honey. I'm so happy for you. I want you there too. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, all the pain and loneliness and fear of the past years seemed to fade away. He wanted her at his wedding. He wanted her to be part of his life again. Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for anything. But I need something from you first. A gesture. A way to close the door on the past. The way he said it made her stomach turn. What kind of gesture? Evan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of a grand hall, all marble and crystal and gold. The ceremony will be here. The Grand Ellison Hall. When you arrive, I need you to enter from the main doors. And I need you to get on your knees and crawl down the aisle to the altar. Margaret stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? You heard me. I need you to crawl. In front of everyone. It's symbolic. A way of acknowledging everything that happened, everything you put me through as a kid. Your drinking, your struggles, the poverty. I need to let go of that. And this is how I do it. Evan, no. You can't be serious. His eyes were cold, harder than she had ever seen them. I'm completely serious. You do this, I pay for your surgery. All of it. You'll have the best doctors, the best care. You'll be fine. You don't do it, you figure it out on your own. But honey, I'm your mother. I did everything for you. I got sober for you. I worked myself to the bone so you could have a better life. And now I'm offering you a way to save your life. But it comes with a price. Everything comes with a price, Margaret. You taught me that. She felt like she was falling, like the ground had opened beneath her, and she was tumbling into darkness. Why? Why would you ask this of me? Because I need to move forward. I need everyone to see that I've dealt with my past, that I've overcome it. This is about closure. About starting my new life without the weight of the old one dragging me down. So I'm the weight. I'm the thing you need to overcome. Take it or leave it. You have until the end of the week to decide. He stood up, put on his coat, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Margaret sat there for a long time, tears streaming down her face, her chest aching with more than just her damaged heart. Around her, people typed and chatted and sipped their expensive coffee, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just shattered into pieces too small to put back together. That night, Margaret called Reverend Cole, the pastor at the small church she attended when she had energy and time. He was a kind man in his 60s who had counseled her through her early sobriety, who had prayed with her when times were hard, who had never judged her for her mistakes. She told him everything, her voice breaking as she described Evan's demand. Don't do it, Reverend Cole said firmly. Margaret, listen to me. What he's asking is cruel. It's degrading. It's designed to humiliate you publicly, to use your desperation as a weapon. You cannot allow yourself to be treated this way. But if I don't, I'll die. Then we'll find another way. I'll call everyone I know. We'll start a fundraiser. The congregation will help. You are not alone in this. There's no time. The doctor said I have months at best. By the time we raise enough money, it'll be too late. Margaret, I have to do it. I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. Always. And choosing to preserve your dignity is not the same as choosing to die. But Margaret wasn't sure she believed that anymore. She thanked him for his concern and hung up. Then she sat in her dark apartment and tried to imagine it. Walking into that grand hall, all those eyes on her, getting down on her knees, crawling like an animal while hundreds of people watched and whispered and recorded her humiliation on their phones. The thought made her physically ill, but the alternative was worse. The alternative was dying alone in this apartment, her body shutting down bit by bit, drowning in her own failing heart. The next day, she went to see Mrs. Alvarez, her former supervisor at the hotel. They had stayed in touch even after Margaret switched departments, meeting occasionally for coffee and conversation. Mrs. Alvarez was a practical woman, tough but fair, someone who had raised 4 kids on her own and knew something about sacrifice and survival. Margaret told her everything. Mrs. Alvarez listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. That boy should be ashamed of himself, Mrs. Alvarez said when Margaret finished. What he's asking is monstrous. You don't owe him that. You don't owe anyone that. I owe myself a chance to live. Not like this. Not at the cost of your soul. Listen to me, Margaret. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to get you started. And I'll talk to people, put the word out. We can raise the money. Maybe not all of it, but enough to make a dent, to give you time. Rosa, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. That's what people do. They help each other. They don't exploit each other's pain for some twisted sense of closure. Margaret squeezed her friend's hand, grateful beyond words for the kindness. But even as she thanked her, she knew it wouldn't be enough. Even if Rosa and Reverend Cole and everyone else they could think of pooled their resources, it would take months to raise $75,000. And she didn't have months. She had weeks, maybe days. Already she could feel herself getting weaker, the episodes of pain becoming more frequent and intense. Soon she wouldn't be able to walk to the bus stop, let alone crawl down an aisle. Lauren sat across from Evan in their favorite Italian restaurant, twirling pasta around her fork, but not eating it. She had been quiet all evening, and Evan could tell something was on her mind. He had been distracted too, his thoughts circling back to the conversation with Margaret, to the plan he had set in motion, to the nagging sense of something being not quite right even though he kept telling himself it was necessary. Evan, Lauren said finally, setting down her fork. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course. Your mother. You told me she died. Evan's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. She did. Then why did my mom mention seeing you at Café Moreau last week with an older woman? She said you looked upset, that the woman was crying. For a moment, Evan considered doubling down on the lie, constructing something elaborate about a distant relative or a family friend. But looking at Lauren's face, at the hurt and confusion there, he realized he couldn't. Not to her. Not forever. That was my mother, he said quietly. Lauren's eyes widened. Your mother is alive? Yes. So you lied to me? About your parents dying? About all of it. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it. Right now. Evan took a long drink of his wine, trying to organize his thoughts, trying to find words that would make Lauren understand without making him look like the person he suspected, deep down, that he really was. I grew up poor, he said finally. Really poor. My mother worked 2 jobs, we lived in a terrible neighborhood, there was never enough of anything. She was an alcoholic for a while. She got sober eventually, but the damage was done. When I got to college, I realized that if I wanted to succeed, I had to leave all that behind. So I did. I reinvented myself. I became someone else. And your mother? What happened to her? She's still there. Still struggling. Still poor. And you just abandoned her? I didn't abandon her. I gave her what she always wanted, a successful son. Someone who made it out. Isn't that what parents are supposed to want? Lauren shook her head slowly. Success at what cost, Evan? You built your whole life on a lie. You erased your own mother from your story. How am I supposed to trust you? Everything I told you about my achievements is true. I did go to Northlake. I did build my career. Those things are real. But the person you are is a lie. The man I fell in love with doesn't exist. He's a character you created. Lauren, please. I know I should have told you. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I wasn't good enough for you. I wouldn't have cared where you came from. My parents wouldn't have cared. But lying? Cutting your mother out of your life? That I care about. Evan reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm trying to fix it. I'm helping her. She's sick. She needs surgery, and I'm paying for it. You're paying for her surgery? Yes. All of it. Something softened in Lauren's expression. That's good. That's really good, Evan. Maybe you can rebuild a relationship with her. Maybe this can be a fresh start. Evan nodded, not mentioning the condition he had attached to his help, the price his mother would have to pay. He told himself he would explain it to Lauren later, that he would make her understand why it was necessary, why it was the only way he could move forward. But even as he thought it, he knew how it would sound. He knew how it would look. And so he said nothing, and Lauren squeezed his hand, believing she had seen a glimpse of her fiancé's better nature, believing that the man she loved was capable of redemption. Margaret called Evan 2 days before the wedding. Her voice was weak, fragile, like it might break apart at any moment. I'll do it, she said. I'll do what you asked. Evan felt a complicated mix of triumph and guilt, satisfaction and shame. You're sure? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. Then I choose to live. Even if living means crawling. I'll have everything arranged. The surgery is scheduled for 2 days after the wedding. Best surgeons in the state. You'll be taken care of. Thank you. The words came out bitter, like she was forcing them through broken glass. I'll see you at the wedding. He hung up and sat in his condo, staring out at the water, trying to feel something other than the hollow emptiness that had settled into his chest. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that this was about setting boundaries, about refusing to let the past define his future. He told himself his mother had made her choices too, that she had put him through hell as a kid, that she didn't get to play the martyr now. He told himself a lot of things. None of them made him feel better. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and gentle sunshine that made the grand Ellison Hall look even more magnificent than usual. Guests began arriving early, dressed in their finest, excited to witness the union of Evan Lewis and Lauren Whitfield. The hall's coordinator had everything running like clockwork, the flowers perfectly arranged, the champagne chilled to exactly the right temperature, the string quartet playing soft classical music as people found their seats. Evan stood in a preparation room, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. His hands shook slightly, and he told himself it was just normal wedding jitters, just the excitement and nervousness that every groom felt. His best man, a colleague named Derek, noticed and clapped him on the shoulder. Relax, man. This is going to be perfect. Lauren looks incredible. The place is gorgeous. Everyone's here. You did it. You made it. Evan nodded, trying to smile, trying to feel the joy that should have been coursing through him. Instead, he felt a creeping dread, a sense that something terrible was about to happen, that he had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Outside the hall, Margaret stood near the entrance, her whole body trembling. She wore the gray dress she had chosen carefully from a thrift store, something simple and neat that wouldn't draw too much attention. Her hands kept smoothing down the fabric, a nervous gesture she couldn't control. A few guests glanced at her curiously, wondering who she was, but most were too absorbed in their own conversations to pay her much attention. Inside, Lauren stood in her bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids, looking absolutely radiant in her wedding dress. It was a custom design, elegant and sophisticated, the kind of dress that would appear in wedding magazines and make brides everywhere sigh with envy. Her mother helped adjust her veil, tears in her eyes. You look beautiful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. Thanks, Mom. And I'm glad Evan is reconciling with his mother. That's important. Family is everything. Lauren nodded, but something nagged at the back of her mind, some instinct that told her there was more to the story than Evan had shared. She pushed the thought away. This was her wedding day. This was supposed to be perfect. She would deal with any complications later. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. At 3:45, the coordinator came to find Evan. We're ready whenever you are, Mr. Lewis. Everyone's seated. The bride is ready. We're just waiting on your signal. Evan took a deep breath. Actually, there's one more thing. There's a guest who needs to make a special entrance. An older woman. She'll be coming through the main doors. Don't stop her. Just let her do what she's going to do. The coordinator looked confused. A special entrance? What kind of entrance? You'll see. Just don't interfere. Mr. Lewis, I'm not sure. I'm paying you a lot of money to make sure this day goes exactly as I want it to. This is what I want. Understand? The coordinator nodded reluctantly. Of course, sir. Whatever you wish. At 3:55, Evan took his place at the altar. The guests fell silent, turning their attention to the front of the hall. The string quartet transitioned into the processional music. The bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, one by one, each carrying a bouquet of white roses. And then, just before Lauren was supposed to enter, the main doors at the back of the hall opened. Margaret stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the windows behind her. For a moment, she looked almost ethereal, like an angel or a ghost. Then she stepped forward into the hall, and the light revealed her clearly, an elderly woman with trembling hands and tears streaming down her face. The guests began to murmur, confused. Who was this? What was happening? Some reached for their phones instinctively, sensing that something unusual was about to occur. Margaret looked down the long aisle toward the altar where Evan stood. The distance seemed impossible, a canyon too wide to cross. But she had no choice. She had made her decision. She would do this thing, this terrible, humiliating thing, because the alternative was death, and she wasn't ready to die yet. She still had hope, foolish as it might be, that on the other side of this crawl, on the other side of this degradation, There might be a future. There might be more time. Slowly, deliberately, Margaret lowered herself to her knees. The marble floor was cold and hard beneath her. She took a deep breath, placed her hands flat on the ground in front of her, and began to crawl. The murmuring in the crowd turned to gasps, to shocked silence, to whispered questions. What is she doing? Why is she crawling? Oh my God, is someone going to stop her? But no one stopped her. No one moved. They just watched, frozen in horrified fascination, as this elderly woman crawled down the aisle like an animal, like a penitent, like someone begging for mercy from a God who had already turned away. Margaret's knees ached immediately, the old bones protesting against the unnatural position. Her hands shook as she moved them forward, one after another, propelling herself inch by inch down that endless aisle. She kept her eyes down, unable to look at the faces surrounding her, unable to see the mixture of pity and disgust and morbid curiosity that she knew would be there. Phones came out. Dozens of them, then hundreds. People recorded, filmed, photographed. Some did it openly, holding their devices up high. Others tried to be subtle, filming from their laps or their purses. But everyone captured it. Everyone wanted proof of what they were witnessing. Lauren stood in the bridal suite, waiting for her cue to walk down the aisle. She heard the gasps from the ceremony hall, the sudden change in the room's energy. Something was wrong. What's happening? She asked her bridesmaids. One of them peeked out into the hall and immediately went pale. Oh my God. Lauren, I think you need to see this. Lauren rushed to the door and looked out. Through the partially open entrance, she could see Margaret crawling, could see Evan standing at the altar with an expression she couldn't quite read. And in that moment, she understood. She understood what Evan had done, what kind of man she had agreed to marry, what kind of future she had been about to commit to. Margaret was halfway down the aisle when the pain in her chest exploded. It felt like someone had reached inside her ribcage and squeezed her heart with an iron fist. She gasped, her arms giving out, her face nearly hitting the marble floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except experience the white-hot agony radiating through her entire body. She could stop. She could collapse right here. Let someone call an ambulance. Let this nightmare end. But if she stopped, if she gave up now, then all of this would have been for nothing. The humiliation would remain, but the surgery would disappear. She would die having crawled halfway down an aisle for no reason at all. So she pushed through. She forced her arms to work, forced herself forward, forced her failing heart to keep beating just a little longer. Tears mixed with sweat on her face, but she kept moving. One hand, then the other. One knee, then the other. Again and again and again. The guests weren't just watching anymore. Some were crying openly, overwhelmed by the raw cruelty of what they were witnessing. Others looked angry, their faces flushed with outrage. A few had put their phones away, unable to participate in documenting this horror any longer. But most kept recording, kept filming, because they knew they were seeing something that would be talked about forever, something that would spread across the internet like wildfire, something that would define everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Near the altar, Evan stood frozen. He had imagined this moment differently. In his mind, it would be quick, symbolic, meaningful in some abstract way. His mother would crawl, make her apology through action, and then it would be done. They would move on to the ceremony. He would marry Lauren. Life would continue, only better, only lighter, only free from the weight of the past. But watching it actually happen was different. Seeing his mother's face contorted in pain, seeing her body shake with effort and humiliation, seeing the looks on the faces of everyone he knew and respected, it wasn't symbolic at all. It was just cruel. It was monstrous. And he had demanded it. Lauren appeared at the back of the hall, still in her wedding dress, her veil askew from running. She saw Margaret struggling, saw the guests recording, saw Evan standing like a statue at the altar. She made a decision in that split second, the kind of decision that defines character. She hiked up her dress and ran down the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble. When she reached Margaret, she knelt down beside her. "Stop," Lauren said gently, putting her hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Please, you don't have to do this." Margaret looked up at her, this beautiful stranger in a wedding dress, tears streaming down both their faces. "If I stop, I die," Margaret whispered. "Then you'll die with your dignity intact. Some things are worth more than life. Easy to say when you're not the one dying. Lauren helped Margaret to her knees, then to her feet. The old woman swayed, unsteady, and Lauren supported her weight. They stood there in the middle of the aisle, the bride and the mother, while 400 guests watched in stunned silence. Lauren turned to look at Evan, and the expression on her face was something he would never forget. It wasn't anger, though there was some of that. It wasn't disappointment, though there was plenty of that too. It was something deeper, colder. It was the look of someone seeing another person truly for the first time and being horrified by what they found. "How could you?" Lauren said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "How could you do this to your own mother?" Evan opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? What explanation could possibly make this okay? "She raised you," Lauren continued, her voice getting stronger. "She worked herself to the bone for you. She got sober for you. She gave you everything she had. And this is how you repay her? By making her crawl like a dog in front of hundreds of people? By using her medical emergency as leverage for your own twisted sense of closure. You don't understand," Evan finally managed. "I understand perfectly. I understand that I almost married a man who is capable of this. A man who would hurt the person who loved him most, who would exploit desperation and illness for his own psychological games." She pulled the engagement ring off her finger and threw it. It clattered across the marble floor, the sound echoing through the silent hall. "The wedding is off," Lauren announced. "Everyone can go home." She turned back to Margaret. "Come with me. Let's get you to a hospital." Margaret let Lauren guide her up the aisle, back toward the door she had entered through. As they walked, some guests started to clap. It began slowly, tentatively, then built into a wave of applause. They were applauding Lauren's courage, Margaret's survival, the ending of something that should never have begun. Evan stood alone at the altar, watching his mother and his ex-fiancée disappear through the doors. He looked out at the sea of faces, and every single one looked back at him with judgment, with disgust, with a complete absence of the respect and admiration he had worked so hard to earn. His best man had backed away from him. His colleagues wouldn't meet his eyes. The future he had so carefully constructed was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The videos hit social media within an hour. By midnight, they had been viewed millions of times. By morning, Margaret's story was on every news site, every morning show, every platform that could carry it. People were outraged. They were heartbroken. They wanted to help. Someone identified Margaret and found her address. Someone else started a crowdfunding campaign. Within 24 hours, it had raised $300,000. Within 48 hours, it had raised over $2 million. People sent messages of support, offers of help, prayers and well wishes from around the world. Margaret, who had spent years being invisible, was suddenly seen by everyone. For Evan, the consequences came swiftly. His employer called him into a meeting on Monday morning. The company's HR director and CEO were both present, their faces grave. "We've been made aware of an incident at your wedding," the CEO said. "It's being handled," Evan replied, trying to sound confident. "It's gone viral. 20 million views and counting. The comments section is calling for your head. Clients are threatening to pull their accounts if we don't take action. You're firing me for what happened at my personal wedding. We're suspending you pending investigation. But let's be honest, Evan, we both know how this ends." Within a week, he was terminated. Within 2 weeks, 3 of his biggest clients had ended their contracts. Within a month, his reputation in the industry was so toxic that no one would hire him. Other companies didn't want the association, didn't want the controversy, didn't want to be the firm that employed the guy who made his mother crawl. His luxury condo, which he could no longer afford, went on the market. His car got repossessed. His friends stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped existing in his life. He had built his entire identity on success and status and perception, and now all of it was gone, destroyed by a single act of cruelty that he could never take back. Margaret underwent her surgery 3 weeks after the wedding. The procedure took 7 hours, but it was successful. The surgeon placed 4 bypasses, repaired damage that had been accumulating for years, gave her heart a chance to heal. When she woke up in recovery, the first face she saw was Lauren's. "You came," Margaret said, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "Of course I came. Someone needs to make sure you're okay." Over the following weeks, as Margaret recovered, she and Lauren formed an unlikely friendship. Lauren visited regularly, bringing flowers and books and conversation. They talked about Lauren's career, about Margaret's past, about mistakes and forgiveness, and what it means to start over. Margaret learned that Lauren had broken off not just the engagement, but also most of her connections to the world she and Evan had shared. It was easier to start fresh than to explain to everyone why she had almost married such a person. During one visit, Lauren brought a proposal. "I've been thinking. You have this platform now, whether you wanted it or not. People are listening to your story. You could use that. You could help others." Help others how? Single mothers who are struggling. People battling addiction. Anyone who needs to know that their past doesn't define their future, that getting sober is possible, that dignity matters. Margaret considered it. She had spent so many years being invisible, being forgotten, being erased from her son's narrative. The idea of being visible, of maturing, of using her pain for something productive, it was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. "I wouldn't know where to start," Margaret admitted. "I'll help you. We'll start a nonprofit together. We'll call it Second Chances or Fresh Start or whatever feels right. We'll fundraise. We'll build programs. We'll create resources for people who are where you were. What do you think?" Margaret felt tears welling up, but these were different from the tears she had cried on that wedding aisle. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "I think yes," she said. 6 months later, the Margaret Lewis Foundation officially launched. The initial funding came from the crowdfunding campaign, supplemented by donations from people who had been moved by her story. They rented a small office in a neighborhood not unlike the one Margaret had raised Evan in. They hired staff, social workers, counselors, people who understood addiction and poverty and the challenge of rebuilding a life from nothing. The foundation offered support groups for single mothers, job training programs, assistance with medical expenses, counseling services, and most importantly, a message of hope. Margaret spoke at the grand opening, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I spent decades sacrificing myself for someone who couldn't see my worth," she said to the crowd gathered in their small office. "I let myself become invisible because I thought that's what love required. But I was wrong. Love shouldn't erase you. Love shouldn't demand your dignity as payment. And getting help shouldn't cost you your soul." The crowd applauded, and Margaret felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just a mother who had been wronged. She was no longer just a victim of her son's cruelty. She was a survivor, an advocate, someone who had transformed her pain into purpose. The applause wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever felt powerless, who had ever been made small by someone who should have made them feel valued. 8 months after the wedding, a letter arrived at the foundation's office. The return address was from a cheap motel in a city 2 hours away. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately. She sat at her desk for a long time, just looking at the envelope, before finally opening it. The letter was long, pages and pages of Evan's careful script, and it took her an hour to read it all. He apologized. He explained. He admitted his shame, his cowardice, his cruelty. He detailed how he had spent the months since the wedding, how he had lost everything, how he had been forced to confront the person he had become. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted her to know that he understood, finally, what he had done. Margaret read the letter 3 times. Then she put it in a drawer and went back to work. The next day, Lauren asked if she had decided how to respond. "I don't think I will respond," Margaret said. "Not right now. Maybe not ever. That's okay. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I do forgive him in my own way. I forgive him because carrying that anger would hurt me more than it would hurt him. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean letting him back into my life. That's healthy. That's boundaries. It's something I should have learned a long time ago." Margaret thought about Evan sometimes, about the little boy who used to wait for her in that apartment, who did his homework under a flickering light, who told her he loved her every single day. She grieved for that boy, but the man he had become was someone she didn't recognize, someone who had made choices she couldn't understand, someone who had valued his image more than her life. A year after the wedding that never was, Margaret stood on a stage at a conference for nonprofit leaders. She was invited to speak about her foundation, about her journey, about the work they were doing. The audience was full of people who ran similar organizations, people who dedicated their lives to helping others, people who understood that sometimes the greatest power comes from surviving your worst moments and choosing to turn them into something meaningful. I want to end with something I've learned. Margaret said as her speech drew to a close. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not something others deserve. I've forgiven my son for what he did to me, but I did it for me, not for him. I forgave him so I could be free, so his actions wouldn't define the rest of my life, so I could wake up without anger eating away at my healed heart. She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. But here's what's equally important. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in my life. I can let go of my anger without opening my door. I can wish them well from a distance without sacrificing my peace up close. That's not cruelty. That's self-preservation. That's wisdom. That's knowing that some relationships are meant to end, and that ending them is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself. The audience rose to their feet, applauding, and Margaret smiled. She had spent so much of her life making herself smaller, dimmer, quieter, so that others could shine. But she was done with that now. She had crawled her last step. From here on out, she would walk tall, or she wouldn't walk at all. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to Margaret's story. If it resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved? How did you navigate forgiveness without sacrificing your well-being? Share your experiences. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. And if you found value in this story, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear Margaret's message about dignity, boundaries, and the true meaning of forgiveness. Sometimes the stories that are hardest to hear are the ones we need most. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember, you deserve relationships that honor your worth, not relationships that require you to crawl.